A 61-year-old widower, Samuel Brooks, and his loyal German shepherd, Buddy, move into a forgotten house on Wind Hill, a place locals call cursed. But when Buddy uncovers a secret hidden behind the fireplace, they awaken a story of greed, fire, and redemption. In saving a town's lost hope, Samuel learns that miracles don't always come from heaven. Sometimes they have fur, a heartbeat, and a bark that saves your soul. Before we begin, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel, leave a like, and may God bless everyone watching tonight. The morning mist drifted low across Willow Creek, soft and cold as breath on glass. Samuel Brooks stood beside his old Ford truck, watching the fog roll over the valley below. He was a man carved by years of hard work and quiet grief, 61, broad-shouldered but slightly stooped, with hands toughened by decades of fixing what others threw away. His face bore the map of his years, deep creases around the mouth, salt and pepper beard trimmed close to his jaw, eyes the gray of winter water. He had once been known for his laugh, deep, contagious, but it had quieted since the day his wife, Margaret, passed from heart failure 2 winters ago. Now, he spoke little, choosing instead to listen, to radios, to wind, to the comforting rhythm of his own tools. At his feet lay Buddy, a 6-year-old German shepherd with fur like burnished bronze and eyes that caught every flicker of motion. Buddy had been Margaret's idea. A companion for your long hours, she'd said. The dog had become Sam's only family since she died. Loyal to the bone, Buddy had learned his master's moods with uncanny precision. When Sam sat alone at night, staring too long at the kitchen wall, Buddy would nudge his knee or drop his favorite tennis ball with quiet insistence, as if to remind him that life, even broken, could still play. The old radio inside the truck hissed and crackled. As usual, Buddy barked at the static, head cocked, tail thumping the dirt. Sam chuckled under his breath. "You never miss your cue, do you, boy?" They were parked in front of the county courthouse for the monthly property auction, a ritual of selling off unpaid taxes and broken dreams. Sam hadn't meant to be here. He'd driven into town for screws and wire, but curiosity, or maybe fate, had tugged him toward the crowd. The auctioneer's voice carried through the morning air like a saw blade through wood. "Next up, Property 47B, Hilltop Manor, Wind Hill Road. Starting bid, $500. There were murmurs, laughter. Someone spat and muttered, "That cursed place again." Sam leaned on his truck, frowning. Hilltop Manor. He'd heard the stories. Built in the 1930s by Victor Romano, a shipping magnate who'd vanished without a trace, the house had since passed through a carousel of owners. Some left after a month, some after a week. "Lights in the attic," folks whispered. "Cold spots. Doors slammed themselves." Others claimed Romano's ghost wandered the halls, searching for the fortune he'd hidden before his mysterious disappearance. Sam wasn't the superstitious type. His ghosts were made of memory, not marble. Still, something about the description, the loneliness of that house perched above the valley, stirred something deep in him. When the auctioneer called, "500 anyone?" Sam lifted his hand almost without meaning to. The crowd turned. A few laughed outright. "Brooks, you buying trouble?" a man called. Sam gave a thin smile. "Wouldn't be my first." 5 minutes later, it was done. Samuel Brooks was the new owner of Wind Hill Manor, for the price of a set of tires. By noon, he was climbing the steep, twisting road to the hill, Buddy's head poking out the window, ears flapping in the wind. The air grew colder as they ascended. The house emerged through the thinning fog. 3 stories of crumbling red brick, ivy clawing up the walls, windows dark as blind eyes. The gate creaked open with a groan that could have been mistaken for protest. "Well, Buddy," Sam murmured, "looks like we've got ourselves a project." The front door resisted at first, then yielded with a sigh. The scent inside was thick, damp wood, dust, the faint metallic tang of disuse. Sam stepped into the foyer. Light filtered through cracked glass onto a staircase lined with portraits. Men and women staring down with that stiff, painted pride of another century. Buddy sniffed around, nails tapping against warped floorboards, tail cautiously wagging. Sam wandered room to room, noting where pipes leaked, where plaster had fallen. Each creak of the house sounded like a question asked long ago and never answered. "Needs work," he muttered, as if talking to a stubborn machine. "But so do I." He spent the rest of the day cleaning, sweeping cobwebs, and dragging out rotted furniture. At dusk, he set up his camping stove in the kitchen, brewed coffee thick enough to stand a spoon, and sat on an overturned crate. Buddy rested his head on Sam's knee. From outside came the faint jingle of wind chimes, but there were no chimes on the porch. Sam frowned. "You hear that?" he asked. Buddy's ears perked. The sound faded. He shook his head. "Old houses talk, don't they?" A knock startled him. At the door stood a woman wrapped in a wool shawl, hair the color of snow melting on stone. Grace Thompson, 58, slender and straight-backed, with kind eyes behind square glasses. She introduced herself as the town librarian and part-time church volunteer. "I heard someone bought the old Romano place," she said, offering a small smile. "I wanted to bring you something." She handed him a rolled parchment, an antique surveyor's map of the property. "Found it in our archives. Might help you find where all the old wiring runs." Sam took it carefully. "Appreciate that. Not many folks come knocking up here," Grace shrugged, her smile soft but wary. "Most folks say it's cursed." Sam chuckled, voice gravelly. "Then it'll fit right in with me." They talked a while on the porch. She told him she'd lost her husband 10 years ago, a factory accident. Since then, she'd poured her days into the library and the church garden. There was a warmth in her manner, a quiet steadiness that reminded Sam of coffee on cold mornings. When she laughed, it was like wind chimes, the real kind. As she turned to leave, Buddy trotted forward, tail wagging. Grace bent to scratch behind his ears. "You've got good company here," she said. Sam nodded. "He's the one running the show." That night, as the fog closed in again, Sam lit a small fire in the ancient stone hearth. Flames flickered weakly, painting the room in restless shadows. Buddy sprawled nearby, eyes half closed. Sam leaned back, listening to the wind moan through the cracks. He thought of Margaret, of her laughter echoing in another kitchen long gone. He thought of Grace, the way her eyes had softened when she looked at the house, as if seeing not ruin but potential. For the first time in years, the ache inside him shifted. Not gone, but moving, alive. Buddy suddenly lifted his head, ears sharp, his gaze fixed on the fireplace. A low growl rose from his chest. "What is it?" Sam asked. He followed Buddy's eyes to the brickwork beside the hearth. A faint metallic scent, like oiled steel, touched his nose. Sam fetched his flashlight, knelt, and tapped the wall. The sound was hollow. Buddy barked once, short and certain. Sam frowned. "Well, I'll be damned." He pried at the edge of the paneling. The plaster gave way with a dry crack. Beneath it lay a narrow iron door, the lock slick with fresh oil. Someone had been here, recently. Buddy whined softly, tail still. Sam's heart thudded once, hard. He reached out, fingertips brushing the cold metal. From somewhere deep in the house, a floorboard creaked, slow, deliberate. "Buddy," Sam whispered, "we're not alone, are we?" The dog growled again, and from beyond the dark hall, a faint, steady tapping began, like someone rhythmically striking metal against stone. By morning, the fog had thickened, until the hills seemed to float above the world like a forgotten island. Samuel Brooks hadn't slept much. The night before, the hollow sound behind the fireplace had kept echoing in his mind, as if the house itself had learned to breathe. Buddy had stayed close all night, his fur warm against Sam's feet, ears twitching at every faint creak. When dawn arrived, gray, quiet, unkind, Sam brewed a pot of coffee on the camping stove and set to work. The iron door in the wall still glistened faintly with oil, proof that someone had touched it recently. "All right," he muttered to Buddy. "Let's see what our uninvited guests left behind." The lock gave way easily, as if surrendering. Inside was a small cavity no larger than a shoebox, filled with dust and one object wrapped in dry cloth. Sam unwrapped it carefully. Inside lay a leather-bound journal, the kind no one used anymore. Dark brown, edges cracked, initials VR stamped faintly on the cover. The smell of old paper mixed with iron and soot. Sam opened the first page and saw a name in faded ink. Victor Romano, dated 1976. The writing was meticulous, slanted, the script of a man who had once controlled empires with his pen. The early entries were mundane, shipping manifests, notes on port taxes, brief reflections about his daughter. But as the pages went on, the tone changed. Guilt began to creep into the margins. Romano wrote of debts, not in money, but in conscience. He spoke of restitution, of a plan to use his estate for something called Harbor Light, a home for the forgotten ones. children without parents, and elders without visitors. The final pages stopped mid-sentence. One note, underlined twice, read, "Funds to be transferred upon my confirmation of safety." Below it was a list of bank accounts, all marked pending. Sam leaned back, staring at the journal as if it might start talking. Buddy whined softly beside him. "Looks like this old place had better intentions than people gave it credit for," Sam murmured. Then he frowned. "So, where did the man go?" He flipped to the very last page. It had been torn halfway down, the bottom missing. What remained said only, "If I disappear, find the key where the ship never sails." Later that afternoon, Grace Thompson arrived in her usual calm way, wrapped in her thick gray shawl and smelling faintly of lavender. Her hair caught the weak sunlight, a mix of white and silver strands that framed a face lined not by age, but by resilience. She noticed the dark circles under Sam's eyes and said softly, "You look like you've been talking to ghosts." "Maybe I have." Sam handed her the journal. Grace sat at the rickety kitchen table, fingers tracing the worn leather. "Victor Romano," she read aloud. "He built half this town before he vanished. My father used to curse his name every tax season." "Seems the man wasn't all bad," Sam said, pouring her coffee. "He wanted to make amends. Problem is, he vanished before he could." Grace turned a few pages, eyes widening at the financial records. "These numbers, they're enormous, and if they were meant for a charity, they never got there," Sam finished. "Somebody made sure of that." The two sat in silence, the ticking of the old wall clock filling the space between them. Buddy sat at Grace's feet, tail sweeping the floor in slow, contented rhythm. Then a sound, faint but sharp, came from outside. Buddy's ears perked. Sam went to the back door and froze. Muddy footprints, large, boot-shaped, trailed from the edge of the woods to the porch, stopping just short of the door, fresh. Whoever they belonged to had been watching. Grace followed his gaze, her voice barely above a whisper. "Sam, someone's been here." Sam nodded grimly, and not just last night. That evening he drove into town to report it. The Willow Creek Police Department was a small, tired building that smelled of old coffee and wet coats. Behind the desk sat Deputy Carl Jensen, a man in his 40s with thinning blonde hair and a belly that tested the limits of his uniform. His eyes carried that mix of suspicion and boredom unique to small-town law enforcement. "So, you're the guy who bought the Romano place," Jensen said, not looking up from his paperwork. "Heard about that." Sam nodded. "Somebody's been poking around up there. Fresh footprints, door locks been oiled. Not exactly kids looking for a thrill." Jensen shrugged. "Probably local teens. That hill's a dare spot. You know, ghosts, buried gold, all that nonsense. I'll send a cruiser up when we can." Sam clenched his jaw. "You think I'm making it up?" "I think you're new in town and that place has a history," Jensen said mildly. "Sometimes, folks see what they expect to see." Sam left without another word. Buddy growled softly as they walked to the truck. "Yeah," Sam muttered. "I don't think he's going to send that cruiser." The next few days passed in a blur of cold rain and research. Grace brought him sandwiches from the church bazaar and joined him in the library archives, poring over property deeds and court filings. The flicker of fluorescent lights reflected in her glasses as she read. "Here," she said one evening, pointing to a yellowed document. "After Romano disappeared, his estate got tied up in probate court. Then it was bought by a holding company, Blake & Sons Development." Sam leaned over her shoulder. "Blake? Richard Blake?" she said, flipping through another folder. "He's that developer trying to buy the harbor land for some luxury resort. Owns half the shoreline already." Sam frowned. He remembered the name. A tall man with an expensive suit and a politician's grin, always smiling for the paper. The kind of man who shook your hand and counted his fingers afterward. Grace continued, reading. There were objections to his purchase. People said the documents were forged, but the court dismissed it after the only witness disappeared. Sam sat back. Romano disappears. His property goes to Blake. Blake now wants the harbor for himself. He rubbed his temples. Coincidence or cover-up? Grace gave him a knowing look. In Willow Creek? Nothing's ever just coincidence. Buddy, sensing tension, nudged Grace's elbow with his nose until she laughed. "All right, boy, you win. Let's take a break." She scratched his ears, and the three of them shared the brief, fragile peace of people who had forgotten how to rest. It was close to midnight when Sam returned home with Buddy. The rain had turned to mist again, and the hilltop glowed faintly under the half moon. Inside, the air felt heavier, as if the house had been holding its breath in his absence. He set the journal on the table and poured himself a drink. Buddy lay by the fire, but his eyes never left the window. The sound of the rain tapping the panes merged with the faint hum of the wind outside. Then Buddy stood abruptly, ears high, growling low. Sam followed his gaze to the back door. A shadow moved, just a flicker, passing across the glass. Sam froze. Slowly he reached for the flashlight. The beam cut through the fog outside, illuminating nothing but the porch railing and the wet steps. But the footprints were there again, fresh, leading away this time, toward the slope behind the house. He followed them with Buddy at his side, boots sinking into wet earth. The trail led to the edge of the woods and stopped near a half-buried stone marker. Sam crouched down, brushed the mud away, and found something wedged in the roots, a small brass key tied with a red ribbon, gleaming faintly under the flashlight. Buddy sniffed it and whined. Sam turned it over in his palm. On its handle, a single word was engraved: Marigold. He frowned. The word stirred something, a name he'd seen somewhere. He flipped open the journal, thumbing through the pages until he reached the torn one. There, written in hurried script before the tear, were the words, "The key where the ship never sails." Marigold, he whispered. That's the ship that's been docked at the old pier for 50 years. A cold gust swept the trees. Somewhere beyond the fog, a metallic clang echoed, like a chain striking a hull. Buddy pressed close to him, trembling, but not from fear, from recognition. Sam rose slowly, staring into the mist toward the harbor far below. "All right, boy," he said quietly. "Looks like tomorrow we're going sailing." The dawn unfurled like pale silk across the harbor, cold and muted, touched by the scent of rust and salt. Samuel Brooks parked his truck beside the abandoned pier, its boards slick with dew and history. The sign, half swallowed by ivy, still read Willow Creek Dockyard, though the last ship had departed decades ago. Only one vessel remained, the Marigold, leaning eternally against the dock, its hull greened by moss and time. Buddy leapt from the truck before Sam could open his door, tail slicing the air in excitement. The 6-year-old German shepherd trotted ahead, nose low, sniffing the path as if following invisible threads of memory. His breath fogged in the chill morning, and when he barked, the sound carried like a challenge to ghosts. Grace Thompson followed carefully behind Sam, her shawl pulled tight around her slender frame. Her silver hair glimmered in the early light, and her expression mixed curiosity with unease. "You're sure this is it?" she asked. Sam nodded, holding up the brass key with the red ribbon. "The ship that never sails," he said. "Marigold." The gangplank moaned as they stepped aboard. The deck sagged underfoot, and the air inside smelled of seaweed, iron, and something older, like paper left too long in a drawer. The boat was a relic, its name barely visible under chipped paint. Buddy sniffed the corners, ears twitching, tail alert. They explored the main cabin first. Broken lanterns hung by rusted chains, and a half-rotted table lay overturned, scattered with brittle maps. Grace brushed dust from a brass compass. "She must have been beautiful once," she murmured. Sam crouched near a hatch that led below deck. "There's something down there," he said, voice low. Buddy's tail thumped twice, his signal that he smelled something interesting, maybe important. They descended carefully, the wooden steps groaning in protest. Below, the dim light revealed crates, coiled rope, and a layer of dust thick as felt. Sam swept his flashlight across the space, and froze. A faint metallic glint reflected from beneath a broken plank. He knelt and pried it up. Inside the hollow was a tin box, tarnished but intact. Grace held her breath as Sam opened it. Inside, wrapped in oiled paper, was another key, this one silver with intricate engravings, and a folder of legal documents, yellowed but dry. Grace adjusted her glasses, reading the top page aloud. "The Harbor Light Trust, established by Victor Romano, 1976. She flipped through, scanning seals and signatures. "These are notarized copies. Official. Romano really did establish the trust." Sam frowned. "Then why did everyone think he was dirty?" Grace pointed to the final document. "Because someone froze his accounts before the transfer. It says here, allegations of embezzlement, filed by Blake Holdings Incorporated." The name hit like a dropped wrench. Sam exhaled slowly. "Richard Blake again." At that moment, Buddy barked sharply, spinning toward the cabin door. Sam tensed. "What is it, boy?" The sound of footsteps echoed on the deck above, heavy, deliberate. Someone else was here. Grace clutched the folder to her chest as Sam motioned for silence. The footsteps grew closer, then paused. A voice, male, coarse, familiar from the local tavern, called down. "Morning, old man. Heard you're digging where you shouldn't." Sam recognized him. Earl Donnelly, a dock worker turned fixer, broad-shouldered and pockmarked, in his late 40s. Earl had a reputation for doing Richard Blake's dirty errands. His black beanie shadowed a face like uncut stone. A scar ran from his chin to his neck, courtesy of a bar fight years ago. "Mr. Blake doesn't like people meddling in the past," Earl said. "He asked me to remind you." Sam stepped forward, voice steady. "Tell Blake the past doesn't belong to him." Earl smiled thinly. "Maybe not, but accidents happen around old docks." Before Sam could respond, Buddy sprang forward with a snarl, lunging up the stairs. The thud of boots followed, then silence, and a yelp. When Sam reached the deck, Earl was gone, a few drops of blood darkening the railing. Buddy stood proud, tail raised, chest heaving. Grace climbed up, breathless. "You could have been killed!" Sam gave a shaky laugh. "So could he." They decided to take the documents to town immediately. Sam wrapped the folder carefully, tucking it beneath his jacket. Buddy stayed close, glancing back at the ship as if reluctant to leave. As they drove away, the rising sun caught on the Marigold's hull, turning it briefly gold again. A ship standing still, but not defeated. By noon, the news had already spread. In Willow Creek, secrets traveled faster than trucks on gravel. By evening, whispers had reached even the diner, where Helen Morris, the plump, red-haired waitress, leaned in to tell Grace, "They say Sam Brooks found proof the Romano fortune was never stolen, that Blake set him up." Grace sighed. People say a lot of things. Still, she couldn't deny the tension tightening around town. That night, as Sam sat in his living room sorting through the papers, something crashed against the window. A stone, followed by a slip of paper. The note read in smeared ink, "Stop stirring still waters." Buddy barked furiously, teeth bared toward the darkness outside. Sam stood frozen, the note trembling in his hand. Fear and anger wrestled inside him. He'd already lost one home, one life. He wouldn't lose another. The next morning, he and Grace drove to Martha Green, a lawyer known for her sharp mind and sharper tongue. Martha was in her late 60s, tall and lean, with white hair cut short and a wardrobe that consisted entirely of navy suits. Her eyes, steel blue behind thin glasses, missed nothing. She had once been a city attorney before retiring to Willow Creek, where she took on small-town cases for sport. She listened as Sam explained everything: the journal, the ship, the threats. When he handed her the documents, she whistled softly. "Well, I'll be damned," she said. "If these are genuine, this could undo half of Blake's empire." Grace leaned forward. "Can we use them to reopen the Harbor Light Trust?" Martha nodded slowly. "We can try, but Blake's got influence. Judges, council members, even the sheriff. If we push this, he'll push back hard." Sam met her gaze. "Then let him." Martha smiled for the first time. "Good. I like a man who doesn't scare easy." She began drafting a motion immediately, her typewriter clacking like gunfire. That night, Sam couldn't sleep. The fog had rolled in again, smothering the hill. The house groaned as if thinking out loud. He sat by the window, Buddy's head resting on his knee. The warmth of the dog's breath steadied him, reminding him that courage wasn't the absence of fear. It was the stubbornness to stay put when fear told you to run. Grace arrived near midnight with a thermos of coffee. Her hands trembled slightly as she poured. "I keep thinking," she said, "maybe Romano wasn't running from guilt. Maybe he was running from Blake." Sam nodded, staring out at the dark. "Maybe both." Buddy lifted his head suddenly, ears pricked. Outside, across the fog, a faint flicker of light appeared, a lantern moving through the trees near the road. Then another, two figures, indistinct, heading toward the house. Sam rose slowly. "Grace," he said, his voice calm but low, "take the papers to Martha first thing tomorrow." She hesitated. "What about you?" He looked down at Buddy, who stood now, muscles taut, eyes glowing like embers. "Me and Buddy will keep the lights on." The figure stopped at the gate, watching the house. The wind carried the faint jingle of chains, like a ship's anchor stirring in the dark. Buddy growled deep in his chest, ready. and outside, through the fog, a voice called softly. Too softly for comfort. Evening, Mr. Brooks. Mr. Blake sends his regards. Oh, the sky above Willow Creek was ink black, the kind of darkness that muffled even the wind. The trial for the Harbor Light Trust was set to begin the next morning, and Samuel Brooks had been up past midnight sorting through the final documents by the faint glow of a desk lamp. Grace Thompson sat across from him, her reading glasses sliding down the bridge of her nose as she double-checked each page. Buddy lay stretched out near the fireplace, half dozing, but with one ear perpetually alert. The house, though old, seemed unusually alive that night. Every creak of timber, every whisper of the wind felt charged, as though the walls themselves held their breath. Sam rubbed his temples, fatigue weighing heavy on his shoulders. "Once this is over," he murmured, "I'll fix the roof, replace that railing, maybe even paint the porch." Grace smiled faintly. "You make it sound like we'll have time for ordinary things." He looked up at her, eyes warm despite the exhaustion. "We will. Ordinary's worth fighting for." Buddy suddenly lifted his head, growling deep in his throat. His amber eyes glinted in the low light. Grace turned. "What is it?" Before Sam could answer, the smell hit him, faint at first, then sharp and unmistakable. Smoke. He sprang from his chair, knocking papers to the floor. "Grace, get outside!" he shouted. But when he reached the hallway, he froze. The stairwell was already a tower of flames, licking upward from the lower floor. The fire moved fast, too fast, as if the house itself had been soaked in anger. Grace screamed his name from the kitchen, the air filled with choking heat and the shrill crack of splitting beams. Buddy barked madly, lunging toward the back corridor. Sam followed, heart hammering. "Grace!" he shouted, coughing hard. She was trapped near the stove, surrounded by smoke, clutching the briefcase of documents to her chest. Her eyes were wide with terror, the firelight flickering and the tears streaking her face. Sam tried to reach her, but the floor between them had begun to buckle. Then Buddy darted toward a side wall, pawing at a small door half hidden behind a stack of wood. The old coal chute, unused for decades. Sam saw it too. "Good boy," he rasped. "Grace, this way." Crawling low, he reached her, wrapping his arm around her shoulders. The smoke clawed at their throats, and the heat felt alive, pressing down like judgment. Guided by Buddy's sharp barks, Sam found the hidden hatch. The metal handle burned his palm, but he wrenched it open anyway. Cold air flooded in, salvation's first breath. They crawled through, one after the other, Buddy leading, Grace coughing behind him. The chute opened to the outside slope behind the house, and they tumbled onto wet grass, gasping. Flames roared behind them, devouring the roof. Sam turned in horror as part of the second floor collapsed. "Everything," he whispered, his voice breaking, but there was no time for mourning. A figure emerged from the darkness, running toward them. A tall man in a leather jacket, face shadowed, eyes hard. He lunged at Grace, trying to snatch the briefcase. Buddy reacted first, a blur of fur and fury. The German Shepherd struck with precision, teeth sinking into the man's arm. The stranger howled and fell, dropping the case. Sam pulled Grace behind him, shouting, "Buddy, down!" The dog obeyed, but his growl rumbled like thunder waiting to strike again. Moments later, flashing red and blue lights painted the burning house in violent color. Sirens wailed as fire trucks and police cars arrived, their lights bouncing off the smoke. Among them stepped Officer Raymond Cooper, a seasoned patrolman in his early 50s with dark skin, broad shoulders, and eyes that had seen more tragedy than most. Cooper had served in the city years before, losing a partner in a warehouse fire. Since then, he'd been obsessed with arson cases. He surveyed the scene quickly, then knelt beside Sam. "You're lucky to be alive. We got a call about flames from the valley. Any idea how it started?" Sam gestured toward the wounded man on the ground, who was being handcuffed by two younger officers. "Ask him." Cooper pulled the man's jacket open, revealing a badge-shaped pin with the initials BHI, Blake Holdings Incorporated. "Well," Cooper muttered, "I guess we found our matchstick." Grace, wrapped in a blanket by a paramedic, trembled, but managed to speak. "He tried to take the documents, the Harbor Light files." Cooper nodded grimly. "We'll handle it from here, ma'am." He glanced at Sam. "You got yourself a hell of a dog." Sam looked at Buddy, who sat panting beside them, muzzle streaked with soot, eyes fierce and loyal. "Yeah," he said softly, "he saved both our lives." By morning, the house on Wind Hill was nothing but a skeleton of blackened beams and drifting ash. Smoke still curled from the wreckage. Sam stood beside the fire truck, staring at what remained. Grace touched his arm gently. "It's just walls," she said, voice trembling. "You're still here. That matters." He nodded, though the words barely registered. The place had been more than a roof. It had been his second chance, his refuge from silence. Losing it felt like losing Margaret all over again. Buddy nudged his leg, tail low but steady, eyes full of understanding. Sam bent down and pressed his forehead against the dog's. "We'll rebuild, boy. Somehow." Later that day, in the courthouse downtown, Martha Green stood tall before the judge. Her navy suit was smudged with ash. She had come straight from the fire. Her voice, however, was steel. "Your Honor," she said, "last night's attack on my clients is further proof of deliberate interference by Mr. Richard Blake and his associates." Across the courtroom, Blake sat with his attorney, a slick man named Gregory Vance, mid-40s, tan complexion, slicked hair, always smirking like he'd already won. He objected repeatedly, but Martha's evidence was airtight. Officer Cooper testified about the arson and the capture of the hired man, who had confessed to being paid to recover documents. The judge, an older woman with silver hair and sharp eyes named Eleanor Whitmore, struck her gavel once. "Until further notice, all of Mr. Romano's assets under the Harbor Light Trust are hereby unfrozen pending verification." Grace squeezed Sam's hand. He exhaled for what felt like the first time in days. Justice was finally turning its face toward them. That evening, as dusk painted the sky with tired gold, something remarkable happened. People began to arrive. Neighbors, churchgoers, retirees. The same town that had once whispered about Sam's misfortune now gathered to lift him back up. Helen Morris, the red-haired waitress, brought stew. Old Tom Dillard, a carpenter with a crooked back, came with timber. Even the teenagers who once called the house haunted showed up with hammers and nails. "We can't replace what burned," Helen said softly, handing Sam a bowl, "but we can give you walls again." Sam looked around. The faces, the helping hands, the warmth returning to the cold hill. He swallowed hard, emotions catching like embers in his throat. Grace stood beside him, her shawl wrapped tight, eyes shining through tears. She reached for his hand, tentative, then firm. "You're not alone anymore, Sam." Buddy barked once, as if in agreement, then curled up beside the pile of wood that would soon become their temporary home. And as the first stars emerged above the blackened hill, the sound of saws and hammers began to echo through the night. The sound of redemption being rebuilt from ashes. Bah! The first day of spring in Willow Creek broke with a fragile kind of brightness. Soft gold sunlight trembling over the harbor's surface, reflecting off the freshly painted walls of the new community center. The sign above the entrance read, in brass letters polished to a quiet glow, "Harbor Light, a home for every heart." Samuel Brooks stood before it, his hands deep in the pockets of his jacket. The lines on his face were still there, but they had softened, like wood sanded smooth by years of wind. His hair, now more silver than gray, moved gently in the sea breeze. At his side, Buddy, his faithful German shepherd, sat tall and calm, a scar from the fire barely visible beneath his thick fur. The dog's amber eyes reflected the world as it was, alive, forgiving, whole again. Grace Thompson approached, carrying a box of fresh flowers from the church garden. The years of strain and uncertainty had thinned her, but her movements were still precise, her smile steady. The sunlight made her silver hair gleam like silk. "They're expecting you inside," she said, nodding toward the gathering crowd. "Your speech, Mr. Brooks." Sam chuckled softly. "Speech? I was hoping to get away with a handshake and a thank you." Grace smiled, teasing. "You're the director now. Directors have to talk." Inside the newly built Harbor Light Center, people had gathered. Townsfolk, volunteers, children, and elderly residents who would soon find warmth here. The smell of fresh paint mingled with coffee and baked bread from the community kitchen. Photos of the construction hung on the walls, workers hammering, children painting signs, Buddy sitting proudly beside piles of bricks. At the front stood Martha Green, the lawyer who had fought at the battle that made this day possible. She looked as sharp as ever in her navy suit, though her hair had grown softer, now streaked with white. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, her voice carrying easily over the hum, "today we reclaim what was stolen. Not just money, but trust. Thanks to Samuel Brooks, Grace Thompson, and a very good dog, Willow Creek has its light back. Applause rippled through the hall. Buddy barked once, perfectly timed, earning laughter from the crowd. Sam stepped up to the podium, clearing his throat. "I don't have much to say," he began, voice deep and measured. "This isn't about me. It's about second chances, for this town, for the kids who will come here, and maybe for people like me who thought they'd run out of road." He paused, glancing toward Grace, whose eyes shimmered with pride. "Victor Romano dreamed of this place a long time ago. We just kept the light burning until it could find its way home." When the applause faded, the mayor, Harold Finch, a barrel-chested man in his 60s, with a booming laugh and a fondness for loud ties, presented Sam with a framed certificate. "Samuel Brooks," he declared, "on behalf of Willow Creek, we name you project manager of Harbor Light." The title made Sam smile, though modestly. He didn't crave importance. He'd seen what pride did to men like Blake. What mattered was the hum of people talking, the clink of mugs, the sound of life moving forward. Outside, Buddy was already at work. A group of children clustered around him, tossing a ball across the courtyard. The old shepherd waited patiently, letting the kids pet his back and tug his ears before returning the ball with a gentle nudge. Nearby, an elderly woman in a wheelchair, Mrs. Edna Rowe, 83, with soft brown skin and a laugh that sounded like wind chimes, stroked Buddy's head. "He's a healer," she said to Grace. "Dogs like that don't just fetch, they mend." Grace knelt beside her, smiling. "He's done more healing than any of us could." By afternoon, the celebration had spilled outdoors. The new therapy garden, ringed by benches and bright tulips, overlooked the harbor where the old ship Marigold still rested, restored, freshly painted, its rust gone, its hull shining like the day it was first launched. The ship had been transformed into a reading pavilion, its deck lined with bookshelves and wind chimes made from seashells collected by the local children. Grace and Sam stood at the dock, watching the light ripple across the water. The breeze carried the faint scent of salt and lilacs. "You know," Grace said softly, "I used to believe stories like this only happened in books. People rebuilding, finding purpose again." Sam turned to her, smiling gently. "Maybe they do happen in books. We just never realized we were the characters." She laughed, that bright, honest laugh that had first cracked open his solitude. "And what chapter would this be?" He looked down at the small wooden box in his hand, the one where I stopped pretending I'm fine on my own. Inside the box lay a ring, not gold or silver, but carved from a piece of charred beam salvaged from the fire. Its surface was polished smooth, dark with grain and memory. "I made it from what survived," Sam said quietly, "because that's what we are, what survives." Grace's breath caught. Tears filled her eyes as he knelt, awkwardly, sincerely, the wind ruffling his hair. "Grace Thompson," he said, "would you walk with me for the rest of whatever road we've got left?" For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Then she whispered, "Yes, Sam, always." Buddy barked 3 times, sharp, joyous, perfect punctuation. The crowd nearby, sensing the moment, erupted in applause and laughter. Martha wiped her eyes, muttering, "About time." Weeks passed, and Harbor Light became more than a building. It became a rhythm. Every morning, the smell of coffee drifted from its open windows. The elderly painted, the children read aloud, and Buddy, wearing a blue vest embroidered with volunteer, made his rounds, offering quiet comfort to anyone who needed it. Officer Raymond Cooper often stopped by after his shift, sipping coffee with Sam while watching Buddy play. "You know," he said one morning, "if that dog ran for mayor, I'd vote for him." Sam laughed. "You'd lose. He doesn't believe in speeches." From the rebuilt porch on Wind Hill, overlooking the town, the view was different now. The house had been restored with donations and volunteer hands, sturdy and sunlit, not haunted anymore. A small wooden sign hung by the gate, where Buddy showed the way. Every evening, Sam, Grace, and Buddy walked the path down to the harbor. The lights of the town shimmered on the water, reflections mingling like a constellation brought to earth. Sam sometimes imagined Victor Romano's spirit somewhere out there, proud, forgiven, at peace. Grace would take his hand, and Buddy would walk slightly ahead, tail waving like a small, faithful banner. And for the first time in a long while, Willow Creek no longer whispered of curses or ghosts. Instead, it told the story, in diners, churches, and late-night porches, of a man, a woman, and a German shepherd who lit a lamp that would never go out again. Sometimes, God doesn't send miracles as thunder or lightning. He sends them quietly, in the form of a loyal dog, a weathered man who refuses to give up, or a woman whose kindness rebuilds what the fire tried to take. In Harbor Light, the real miracle wasn't in the treasure hidden behind the wall. It was in faith restored, love reborn, and a community learning that even the smallest act of compassion can be divine. Because when we help others find their way out of darkness, we become the very light God intended us to be. So, tonight, if you're watching this story, take a moment to thank Him for the quiet miracles walking beside you. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment with your thoughts, subscribe to the channel, and may God bless you and your loved ones with peace, warmth, and the courage to keep the light burning. For even the darkest nights still belong to the dawn He promised.